Have you ever noticed how one bad morning can hijack your entire day? Like your mood gets decided before you even understand what happened? You wake up late, your mind is already racing, your body feels heavy, and suddenly everything feels harder than it should. And even when nothing terrible happened, you still feel behind, like the day started without your permission. This is the story of Ethan, a man who spent years blaming his life, his job, and his lack of motivation, until he discovered a quiet truth that changed everything. Ethan believed his problems were big, complex, and permanent, because that's what it feels like when you're stuck inside the same patterns. He thought he needed a new opportunity, a new environment, a new version of himself, because he assumed change had to be dramatic. But what Ethan didn't realize was that his entire life was being shaped by something much smaller than his dreams. It was being shaped by his mornings, the first 30 minutes that quietly trained his mind how to see the world. Every morning Ethan woke up and immediately checked his phone, not because he loved it, but because he didn't know how to sit with silence. The screen gave him instant stimulation, and stimulation felt like comfort when his mind felt uncertain. He would scroll through news, messages, and random content, and his brain would fill with other people's emotions before he even found his own. By the time he stood up, his nervous system was already activated, and he didn't understand why he felt anxious. Then he would rush into the bathroom, rush into clothes, rush into coffee, and his entire morning felt like reaction. It wasn't a morning, it was a chase, and he started the day already trying to catch up to something invisible. Ethan told himself he would focus later, he would be calm later, he would be disciplined later, but later rarely comes when you start in chaos. When he arrived at work, he felt irritated because his mind was already tired from consuming too much too early. He would snap at small things, overthink simple tasks, and feel like the world was moving faster than he could handle. And the most confusing part was that he wasn't always like this, because some days he felt sharp, calm, and productive. Those good days felt rare and unpredictable, like they depended on luck rather than something he could control. So Ethan began to believe that his personality was unstable, that his motivation was inconsistent, and that life was simply hard. But the truth was simpler. Ethan's mornings were training his mind to stay in a constant state of pressure. A pressured mind doesn't think clearly, it reacts quickly, and reaction creates mistakes that create more stress. Ethan didn't notice it, but his mornings were not neutral. They were setting the emotional tone of his entire day. Because the first thing you do in the morning becomes the first signal your brain receives about what kind of day this will be. If the first signal is urgency, your brain prepares for survival. If the first signal is comparison, your brain prepares for insecurity. If the first signal is noise, your brain prepares for distraction. Ethan's first signal was always noise, and noise is a thief that steals your attention before you choose where it goes. One morning, Ethan woke up and his phone was dead, and at first he felt frustrated, like something was missing. He stood there in silence, with no notifications, no quick dopamine, and he didn't know what to do with himself. So he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, and for the first time in a long time, he heard his own thoughts. His thoughts weren't inspirational. They were messy, anxious, and unfinished, but they were his. And that moment revealed something Ethan hadn't admitted. He was using his phone to escape his own mind. That realization felt uncomfortable because it meant the problem wasn't the world, it was how he was entering the world. Later that day, Ethan met an older coworker named Samuel, a calm man who never seemed rushed even when work was heavy. Ethan asked him how he stayed so steady, and Samuel didn't answer with motivation. He answered with a question. He asked Ethan how he starts his day, and Ethan laughed because starting the day felt like something that just happened to him. Samuel told him something simple. Your morning is your steering wheel, and most people hand it to the world. Ethan didn't fully understand, so Samuel explained it in a way Ethan could feel. He said your brain is like wet cement in the morning. and whatever steps on it first leaves the deepest imprint. Ethan felt that sentence land because his mornings did feel like his mind was softer, more sensitive, more easily shaped. Samuel said if you start your day in reaction, you spend the rest of the day reacting because your brain stays in the same mode. But if you start your day with intention, you build a different kind of day because you choose the first direction. Ethan wanted a practical answer, not philosophy, so Samuel gave him a small experiment. He said for 7 days, don't change your whole life, just change the first 10 minutes. Ethan was skeptical because 10 minutes sounded too small to matter. But Samuel told him small things matter most when they happen first, because first things define everything that follows. That night, Ethan charged his phone, but he placed it across the room, far enough that he couldn't grab it without standing up. He felt nervous doing that, because he didn't like the idea of being alone with his mind. Morning came, and Ethan woke up and instinctively reached for his phone, and his hand found nothing. He felt a spike of irritation, as if the phone was a lifeline, and he realized how dependent he had become on immediate input. He stood up, walked to the phone, and then stopped, because he remembered the experiment. Instead of picking it up, he sat back down and took one slow breath, then another, then another. At first, it felt pointless, like breathing was too simple to change anything. But after a minute, something subtle happened. His mind slowed down just enough for him to feel present. Then Ethan opened the curtains and let light enter the room, and light felt like a signal of beginning, not urgency. He drank a glass of water slowly, not while scrolling, not while rushing, just as a quiet reset for his body. Then he wrote one sentence on paper, one sentence that would guide his day. He wrote, "Today I will protect my focus," and the sentence felt strong because it was clear. Ethan didn't do a perfect routine. He didn't meditate for 30 minutes. He didn't run a marathon. He simply entered the day differently, and that difference changed the way he felt inside his own skin. When he arrived at work, he noticed he wasn't irritated, and he didn't feel behind. He still had tasks, still had pressure, but his mind felt like it had a center. The day wasn't magical, but it was smoother, and Ethan realized smoothness is a form of freedom. On day 2, he repeated the experiment, and it felt slightly easier. On day 3, he noticed how quickly his mind wanted to reach for noise, because noise is the habit of avoiding yourself. But he also noticed something else. Without noise, his mind could finally hear what mattered. He began to realize that many of his problems weren't problems, they were emotional reactions created by rushed mornings. When you start the day in stress, you interpret everything as stress. When you start the day in calm, you interpret the same events differently. Ethan began to understand the invisible power of mornings. They don't just start the day, they train your identity. If you start in chaos, you become someone who lives in chaos. If you start with intention, you become someone who leads your life instead of chasing it. By the end of the week, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control, not control of the world, but control of his attention. Samuel told him the point is not to build a perfect morning. The point is to choose the first input your brain receives. Because your first input becomes your first emotion becomes your first behavior, and behavior becomes your day. Ethan started building a simple morning formula, not complicated, just consistent. He called it the 3 decisions: what I consume, what I focus on, and how I speak to myself. In the morning, he consumed silence instead of chaos, because silence lets your mind settle. He focused on one intention instead of 1,000 worries, because intention creates direction. And he spoke to himself like a leader instead of a critic, because self-talk becomes your emotional environment. Ethan realized most people ruin their day before it begins, not because life is cruel, but because they start by surrendering attention. They wake up and immediately let the world decide their mood. They let notifications decide their priorities. They let comparison decide their self-worth. They let urgency decide their pace. And then they wonder why they feel exhausted, why they feel distracted, why they feel lost. Ethan stopped blaming himself for being inconsistent because he saw the pattern clearly. His mornings were programming him, and once you see the program, you can change it. He began to treat mornings like a doorway, and he stopped entering the doorway in panic. Some mornings he still felt heavy, because changing habits doesn't erase emotions instantly. But now he knew what to do when heaviness appeared. He slowed down, breathed, and chose the first direction again. He learned that the most important battle of the day is not at work, not with people, not with tasks. It is the battle for your attention in the first minutes after waking. Because attention is your life, and where your attention goes, your life follows. If you want a different life, you don't need a dramatic restart. You need a different morning start. You need 10 minutes of intention before the world reaches you. You need one decision before you consume anything else. You need one breath before you react. Ethan's life didn't change overnight, but his days became more stable, and stability creates progress. Progress creates confidence, and confidence creates a new identity. Ethan realized he wasn't building mornings, he was building a mind. And once his mind became steadier, everything else became easier to face. So if you feel like your life is slipping, if you feel like you're always behind, start here. Don't try to fix everything, fix the first 10 minutes. Don't ask for motivation, ask for direction. Don't start with noise, start with intention. Because your mornings decide your mind, and your mind decides your life. Try this tomorrow. No phone for 10 minutes, one glass of water, one deep breath, one sentence of intention. Do it for 7 days, and watch how the rest of your day begins to follow a new path. Not because the world changed, but because you entered the world differently. And remember this, quietly and clearly, the way Ethan learned it through repetition. Every story reshapes your mindset, and every morning is a chance to choose your life again.